Everyone remembers Maui as the larger-than-life demigod who could pull islands from the sea, slow down the sun, and shapeshift into any creature he desired. But what if I told you that Disney has quietly set up Moana to surpass him in raw power, and the proof is glowing right on her skin? That's right, the tattoo. At first glance, Maui's magical tattoos and Moana's glowing new ink in Moana 2 look like a simple parallel. But when you dig into the mythology, the canon sequences, and the contrast in their journeys, a much deeper truth emerges. The film sets up subtle signals that their powers are not the same, and that one path holds greater weight than the other. And while Maui's gifts make him dependent, Moana's mark hints that her gifts may be far stronger, rooted in something he never achieved. To truly grasp why Moana's transformation matters, we first need to revisit Maui's origin story, because only by seeing where his power comes from can we understand why hers is so much stronger. To understand why Moana's tattoo means so much and how it differs from Maui's tattoos, we have to start with Maui himself. In the original Moana, Maui lays out his entire backstory during his song You're Welcome. But behind the jokes and swagger, his origin reveals something crucial. Maui was not born a demigod. He was born human. Rejected and abandoned by his parents, he was literally thrown into the ocean as an infant. But the gods took pity on him. They rescued him, raised him, and gifted him a magical fish hook. That hook was everything. It gave him the ability to shapeshift into any creature. It gave him supernatural strength. It gave him his identity. Without it, he had no claim to being a demigod at all. His entire reputation, every story he told about himself, hinged on the existence of that hook. And not only that, but Maui's powers were gifted to him. They weren't earned, they weren't forged through trial, and they weren't intrinsic. They were born of pity from the gods, granted out of charity, anchored to a single object rather than his own essence. And the movie makes it clear just how fragile that arrangement really was. Every time Maui's hook is damaged, his powers weaken. Break the hook, and Maui is reduced to a mortal again. In other words, Maui's so-called demigod status is entirely conditional. Without the hook, he's nothing more than a very strong man with a very big ego. Keep that in mind, because Moana's story is the complete opposite. Fast forward to Moana 2, and we see Disney raising the stakes in a big way. This time, Moana isn't just a wayfinder or a chosen leader. She's thrust into an ordeal that echoes some of the oldest mythologies in human history. What she faces is more than a test of skill. It's a trial of the soul, the kind of passage that forever separates mortals from legends. By entering this stage of the story, Disney signals that Moana's gifts are about to transcend Maui, setting her apart as something truly extraordinary and essential to the larger mythos. The turning point comes during her dive to revive Motofetu, the sunken island. In this moment, she isn't just facing the sea, she's facing death itself. Nalo, the lightning spirit, strikes her directly, and not in some metaphorical brush-with-death way. Moana actually dies. Her lifeless body sinks into the depths. The film doesn't leave it ambiguous. Her soul has crossed over, and that's when her ancestors appear. Led by Gramatala, the guiding spirit who has always been Moana's connection to her destiny, they surround her, they choose her, they restore her life. And when Moana awakens, she is forever changed. On her arm is a glowing tattoo, described in the film as a mark shared by gods and demigods. It is not decoration, it is proof that she has crossed into death and been reborn with divine essence. Unlike Maui's hook, Moana's tattoo is not an external tool. It's part of her body, part of her very being. She didn't just survive, she transcended. In that moment, Moana crossed the boundary between mortal and divine, carrying proof of her transformation in her very skin. And here's where the contrast between Maui and Moana becomes undeniable. Maui never died. He never faced the abyss. He was abandoned, yes. But his demigod status came as a gift. He was adopted into divinity, handed a hook, and made powerful by association. This means that Maui's claim to power was conditional, rooted in external favor rather than inner transformation. It highlights the fragile foundation of his identity, which becomes essential when comparing it to Moana's permanent self-forged gifts. When you place his journey beside Moana's, the contrast becomes undeniable. Moana literally died. Her demigod transformation required a sacrifice Maui never faced. She went through the ultimate trial, losing her life, and came back marked permanently by the gods. That kind of passage redefines her identity, proving she didn't just inherit power, but embodied it. It shows that while Maui's gifts could always be taken away, Moana's power is forever, written into her very being. And that's the difference. Maui's transformation was circumstantial. Moana's was sacrificial. In countless cultures, from Greek to Polynesian to Norse, true divine power is earned through death and rebirth. Hercules, Odin, even Christ-like figures all achieve immortality or divinity by passing through death. In fact, some could even argue that Moana is an actual god rather than just a demigod, which would be crazy, because that would imply she could be immortal. But it makes sense when you realize she went through a completely different process than Maui to receive her powers, one that freed her from dependence on an external object and allowed her to simply exist as the source of her own divinity. Now, with all that in mind, what about Moana's oar? At first glance, it might seem just like Maui's hook, but in truth, the two serve entirely different purposes. Maui's hook? It is his power. Without it, he has nothing. No strength, no shape-shifting, no claim to divinity. His entire identity is wrapped up in that single object, making his godhood fragile and conditional. This dependence is what makes his gift so much weaker in comparison to Moana's, whose power comes from within and cannot be stripped away. Notice how in Moana 2, Maui only regains his tattoos when he gets his hook back. He literally has to touch the hook, and then the tattoos and his powers spread from the hook onto his body. This shows that his connection to power isn't natural or permanent, but conditional and object-bound. Now compare that to Moana's oar. When she awakens, she already has the tattoo, but without her oar present. It's only when she stands up that her oar comes to her, and it's only when she touches it that the oar lights up with power. In other words, it's the complete opposite of Maui. The oar isn't the power, she is. The glow is a reflection of what already exists inside her, a sign that she herself has become the source. Unlike Maui, her strength doesn't hinge on holding on to anything. If anything, she gives the oar its power, as an extension of her. The oar reflects her new identity, but it doesn't define it. If Maui drops his hook, he loses everything. If Moana drops her oar, she's still glowing with divine energy. And her tattoo, her mark of death and rebirth, is proof that the power is intrinsic. She carries it whether or not she's holding anything at all. That makes her infinitely more stable and powerful than Maui. He's dependent. She's independent. And when you zoom out and look at the bigger picture, death and rebirth matter a lot in storytelling. Because it's the ultimate archetype. From ancient myths to modern films, heroes who pass through death and return are always marked as something more than human. It's the threshold no ordinary mortal can cross. And when they return, they're no longer just people, they're symbols, legends. Moana's lightning strike, her death, and her revival with the tattoo is that archetype made canon in Disney. Maui, by contrast, is the outlier. He didn't die. He didn't earn it. His status is secondhand, more like an adopted title than a forged identity. It may even indicate that in order to receive true powers not dependent on an object, one must sacrifice themselves and die for something bigger than themselves. This is why Moana's story resonates so strongly. She embodies the ancient pattern of the hero's journey in a way Maui never did. When we line this up clearly, the contrast is striking. Maui represents adopted power. He was abandoned, pitied, and given a tool. His identity is fragile, dependent, and conditional. Without the hook, he's powerless. Moana, on the other hand, embodies earned power. She died, was revived, and now carries a tattoo permanently marking her as a demigod, or maybe even a full-fledged god in her own right. Her identity is intrinsic, untouchable, and eternal. Maui was given power. Moana became power. And when you compare the two, her power isn't just equal to his, it surpasses it. So what does this mean for Disney's canon going forward? If Maui's powers are dependent and Moana's are intrinsic, then logically, Moana is the stronger demigod. She has the permanence, the mythological precedent, and the divine mark to prove it. Which raises the ultimate question. If she's already surpassed Maui by Moana 2, what kind of powers could she unlock in Moana 3? Because remember, tattoos in Polynesian tradition are not just symbols, they're living stories. If her first tattoo marks death and rebirth, what happens when she earns her second or third? So now the question falls to you. Do you think Moana is the greatest demigod Disney has ever created, or does Maui still hold the crown? Be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below.